Despite being at least 40,000 years old, the massive armored doors to the underground shelter looked very impressive. They were not brand new, of course, but clearly capable of withstanding quite a few more millennia. The Tofane were good at building, Michel said, looking at the lines of angular symbols on one of the doors. Even the manual is still readable. Too bad their language has never been deciphered. Are you sure it's a manual? Chingri asked. His lean, bipedal, mantis-like figure leaned toward the inscription. Maybe it's a warning to anyone wanting to get inside. Like a "don't get in, you'll get killed" sign. Meshel chuckled. It's a bit long for that, don't you think? And there's no skull and bones around. Chingri flicked the chitinous spikes on his shoulders. It was the Lutrinian equivalent of a shrug. The Tofane hardly ever used pictograms. You know that as well as I do. So what? Meshel asked. Chingri's stubbornness and meticulousness would have driven anyone else crazy, but he was used to it. They'd been working together for years. How many Tofane bunkers and fortresses we've scoured and never had any trouble. But this is the first tightly sealed bunker we've ever come across, or anyone else for that matter. Chingri attached a small device to the lightly scratched surface of the door. Let's see what's inside. Meshel remained silent. In truth, he realized that Chingri was right. Little was known about the Tofane other than that it had once been a thriving civilization that had left numerous ruins throughout the galaxy. The most alarming thing was that they were mostly ruins of underground fortified bunkers and cities that had been sealed off from the outside world. Most of them bore the marks of brutal battles. It was believed that the Tofane civilization had burned in some terrible war. But no one had ever found the remains of the Tofane themselves. The most important was that, in some of these ruins, crystals of quantumite, a substance capable of storing incredible amounts of energy, were very rarely found. Batteries based on quantumite crystals were hundreds of thousands of times more powerful than any other, and were the basis for the most efficient modern technologies. The ship on which Meshel and Chingri had come to this world, the distant planet didn't even have its own name beyond a set of numbers and letters in the Universal Directory, also had quantumite batteries. But quantumite was expensive. Very expensive. Its production involved huge specialized automated stations in low orbit around black holes and interaction with certain universe parameters, understood only by a few scientists. So when it became clear that the Tofane had left a legacy of scattered quantumite crystals, everyone from large corporations and planetary governments to individual adventurers such as Meshel and Chingri was on the hunt for them. However, luck was, at best, 1 in 1,000. Magnates and politicians quickly realized that it was cheaper and, more importantly, more reliable to produce quantumite, and most adventurers quickly went bankrupt or disappeared into the vastness of the galaxy. Meshel and Chingri were almost extinct species, relics of a bygone age of adventure. But if they couldn't find a single crystal soon, they might well go from relics to a lower category. Traveling around the galaxy wasn't cheap, and they were running out of money. The cushion from selling the last crystal they'd found over a year ago was almost spent. What is it? Meshel asked impatiently. Chingri stared intently at the device's screen, occasionally pressing various keys to adjust the portable scanner's mode. Finally, he straightened up, flexed, and unbent his 4-jointed arms several times. It was like the movement of some kind of mechanism and meant that Chingri was thinking intently. His faceted eyes glittered all the rainbow colors in the light of the dim local sun. The doors are locked from the inside mechanically. They are just big bolts with slots and gears that have to be turned by hand. There are no motors. I think we can open them with power grips. Wouldn't it be easier to blow them up? Meshel asked, not wanting to waste another day installing a complicated power effector generator. Chingri looked at him, flicking the spikes again. Chingri looked at him, flicking the spikes again. The flaps are very, very thick. They're made of Tofane armor. To blow them up, we need to nuke them. Do you really want to work in a tank suit? That's if we don't turn the whole bunker into a piece of molten rock. Meshel looked at the massive ancient doors with hatred. All right, he said. Let's return to the ship and unload the stuff we need. Finally, Meshel said, watching as Chingri adjusted the force grips, checking the readings from the several scanners mounted on the doors. Hopefully, the fact that the bunker has been sealed all this time increases our chances. Just as long as they're not chances of running into some shit, Chingri said. The dungeon hasn't been looted, and that's certainly a good thing. But it also means that all the possible traps inside have not yet been triggered and are just waiting to be set. Meshel looked at his partner in surprise. What's the matter with you? Are you getting old? You make us sound like robbers of a pharaoh's tomb, Chin. This is just the ruins of a war that ended 40,000 years ago. There's never been a single instance of anyone stumbling across anything still functional enough to be dangerous. Chingri finished setting up and nodded to Meshel. The two of them disconnected all the scanners so they wouldn't accidentally damage them when the flaps opened. Who knows, said the Lutrinian, carefully tucking the last scanner into its case. Maybe it's survivorship bias. Meshel shook his head. Of course, it could be, but it still sounds overcomplicated. If we accept it, it turns out that not a single soul who encountered these hypothetical Tofane traps survived to tell about it. It's like 100% lethal effectiveness. There's no way something so ancient could remain so deadly. Besides, don't forget, it wasn't just privateers like us who used to do this. The feds and corporations may have had their own reasons for keeping quiet, Chingri said. I hope you're right. Shall we begin? Meshel spat on the dusty, rocky surface beneath his feet. Let's do it. What else is there to wait for? Despite Chingri's doubts and Meshel's fears, the operation to open the bunker went surprisingly smoothly. Even though very massive and probably corroded, the ancient mechanics could not resist the powerful force fields concentrated into invisible grapple effectors. Obeying the equipment, which drew power from, ironically enough, a powerful quantumite battery, the heavy flaps shook. A dark gap formed between them, and then the armored doors crept apart with a rattle and clang. Fountains of sand and dust erupted from the slots long ago, clogged with sedimentary rock, and Meshel and Chingri had to take cover behind the generator shield. But then, it was quiet, and the two searchers peered into the dusty, dark doorway. I can't see a damn thing, Meshel said after a moment. I'll take a closer look. Before Chingri could stop him, he jumped from the platform, grabbed a powerful handheld torch, stepped up to the bunker entrance, and pressed the switch. A cone of bright light burst into the dark cavity, picking out all the details from the inky darkness. I'll be damn, Meshel said after a good minute. What the hell? Chingri stepped down from the platform and stood beside him. The two of them stared, stunned at what was revealed before their eyes. As was always the case with such structures, there was a relatively large room just beyond the gate, a vestibule at the entrance. At its far end, about 20 meters away, there was a dark passage to the next bunker rooms. However, it was almost invisible. The entire space between the gate and the exit from the vestibule was littered with bones and mummified bodies, in some places forming piles almost as tall as a man or even a Lutrinian. You know, they weren't too different from us, Meshel said, looking at one of the bodies. Chingri looked back. You mean from humans, he said. Well, apart from the extra pair of arms, the beak, and a few other minor things, yes. The Tofanes do look something like humans, or rather, you look like them. Don't be so boring. Meshel took hold of the remnants of the clothes covering his body, but the fabric crumbled into ashes. You do realize that until now, no one knew exactly what the Tofane looked like, don't you? They haven't left us a single image. We're the first ones to see them. The disadvantages of technological advancement, Chingri said. Had they been primitive savages, they would surely have left some cave paintings or even bas-reliefs or crude statues. When our civilizations die, our media will die with us, and those who study our planets 20,000 years from now will wonder what we were like, unless they get to Earth or Lutrin. Besides, we don't know for sure that these are Tofane bodies. My God, who else would it be? In a locked Tofane dungeon? Let's not get distracted by all this nonsense. We must focus on why we're here. We need the crystals. Leave the research to the scientists. Demonstrating his determination, Meshel began to actively make his way through the remains to the passage deep into the vault, darkened in the far wall. The scientists won't be happy that we're digging around and ruining their archaeological picture, Chingri remarked, but he followed his partner. They'll get over it, Meshel said. The law is on our side. The Chaffee Act hasn't been repealed, and we're not even on a federal planet, but in the god-forsaken hole in the back of the galaxy. It's not like we're going to turn this place upside down. Let's find the Quantumite and get the hell out of here. We'll notify the nearest university at the first opportunity. Chingri stopped suddenly and leaned over, looking at something under his feet. There was a battle here, he said, and pointed down. Meshel went over to look at it. Indeed, in the hands of another mummy, in the upper arms, Meshel noted to himself, was a half-dispersed something in which the keen eye could easily catch the outline of a weapon that looked vaguely like a kinetic rifle or a plasma gun. I've seen a few more of these, Chingri said, not far from the entrance. Meshel looked around, but couldn't see anything in the gruesome piles of bodies. You mean from the gate we unlocked? He asked. No. Chingri pointed with his multi-jointed hand toward the dungeon passage. Not far from there. Meshel sighed and shook his head. It looked like someone didn't want all those poor people to get in. I just don't understand why they had to let them in and cause a massacre inside. Well, let the archaeologists deal with it. Come on, let's go. They had explored so many different Tofane ruins that they had no trouble finding their way around this underground shelter. They had no doubt it was a shelter. Living quarters, warehouses, mess halls, and classrooms were easily recognizable. The dry and almost sterile atmosphere allowed some furniture and equipment to survive even after such a long time. Meshel and Chingri cautiously peered into every room they came across, but with little expectation. The Quantumite crystals were always in the central power hub of the shelter, its heart, without which it could not exist. And everywhere, they found the remains of Tofane. There were especially many of them in the passageway rooms through which they could access other parts of the shelter. In these rooms and halls, there were the remains of barricades, obviously made of whatever was available, and at all such barricades lay soldiers, as Meshel had dubbed them, that is Tofane with weapons. The guys fought to the end, Meshel remarked as they passed through another room turned into boneyard. I don't know what caused all this, but a fight like that. He shook his head. It's like the ones with the guns were outnumbered, and they were just trampled, piled up with bodies. It's horrible. You know, it sounds to me like it's a good thing it all happened so long ago. It seems those Tofane weren't very nice guys. Chingri walked on, glancing at the tablet that automatically recorded their route and the layout of the rooms and corridors they had traveled. His fasted eyes flashed iridescently when the beam of Mescal's torch hit them. Don't you think there's too many of them? He asked as they approached the center of the shelter. I mean, considering the size of the structure, It's literally crammed full of them. Maybe that's why the conflict started. They realized there weren't enough resources. He didn't finish and flicked his shoulder spikes. Suppose so, Meshel replied. I had the same thought. But the Tofane have successfully eliminated themselves not only here, but all over the galaxy, killing off all other intelligent races that had the misfortune to travel interstellar paths in the same historical period with them. Humans and Lutrenians were lucky because we were still wandering the savannah in primitive tribes and couldn't even speak. We roamed in primitive swarms, but in general, you're right, Chingri said. Something happened to them, something very bad and scary. Hopefully, 40,000 years is enough time to bury that something forever. Maybe linguists and archaeologists will eventually be able to decipher the Tofane language and figure out what it was. I wouldn't want a repeat. There, I think this is the passageway to the central power node. Like most Tofane capital buildings, the central energy hub was a spacious circular room with a power plant in the middle. Tofane did not use any advanced technologies for energy production. Judging by the debris, they were, just like modern civilizations, using cold fusion reactors. The only difference was the large quantumite batteries that all Tofane power plants were equipped with. Nobody now could afford such a luxury. Over the past tens of thousands of years, almost everything had been looted, but it was clear from the empty crystal sockets what huge reserves of this substance the Tofane had. Scientists were still debating how the Tofane managed to produce such vast quantities of quantumite. It could not be put down to a long accumulation period, as the Tofane civilization before its sudden catastrophic collapse had lasted only a short time, at most a few hundred years of the space age. But for Meshel and Chingre, this mystery was about to turn into riches. After all, this shelter had stood untouched for the entire time since the death of its occupants. So all the crystals must be in place. It looks like the last battle occurred here, Chingre said. Look, the barricades run in a ring around the entire circumference of the hall. Strange. If it were a matter of survival with limited resources, I'd expect a desperate scramble for the food storages and living quarters of the shelter's privileged inhabitants. To hell with them, Meshel said, jumping over one of the barricades, a concrete slab with rusty iron stumps at the ends. Stepping on one of the mummies, which crumbled beneath his feet, he staggered and nearly fell. Damn, even here, there are dead everywhere. I'd hate to be here at the hottest moment. The beam of his lantern fell on the massive structure in the hall's center. Holy shit, he said slowly, changing the focus of the torch so that the beam of light now illuminated what he had hitherto thought was a reactor from its base almost to its junction with the ceiling of the hall. If it was a reactor, I'll be damned if I could figure out how it worked. The structure looked most like a giant rock outgrowth, a kind of column formed from the fusion of giant stalactites and stalagmites, assuming, of course, that stalactites and stalagmites could be perfectly symmetrical in shape, and composed of a strange material like black frosted glass. Two outgrowths streamed towards each other in diminishing cascades, tapering towards the middle and leaving a paradoxical feeling of something both inorganic and disgustingly alive. Each cascading overgrowth ended in a notch, some of which still showed the small pieces of... Damn it! Meshel and Chingre had seen burned-out quantumite crystals before. Even quantumite's incredible energy capacity had its limits. If overloaded, the crystal would dump its stored energy into subspace, disrupting its unique subatomic structure. Quantumite turned into a useless piece of stone. The dream about the jackpot suddenly turned into bitter disappointment. I don't like this, Chingre said. His sensitive antennae above the iridescent hemispheres of his eyes were almost pressed against his oblong head, indicating that the Lutrenian was anxious and frightened. This was clearly not a reactor. Why did the crystals burn out if it wasn't a reactor? Why were the Tofane fighting to the death here, literally to the last survivor? If their soldiers were defending this thing, he pointed to the altar, why are their bodies on the outside of the barricade and the bodies of those they shot at on the inside? They broke through and threw the defenders away. Michel shrugged. What difference does it make? You're worrying about the wrong thing, pal. I can't believe we've pulled out the blank. So much work. Such a long journey for what? He began to walk around the altar, scrutinizing the structure. Maybe there's at least... Aha! Chingri stirred, turning to his partner. What is it? He asked. The Lutranian didn't express emotion through sound, but it was clear enough that he was on the verge of snapping. I knew it! Meshel triumphantly slapped himself on the thigh. There is justice in the world. It couldn't be that we got nothing after all we've been through. He pointed to the central lintel, which also had a niche, only noticeably larger than the others, scattered across the altar's surface. In the niche was a big quantumite crystal, at least 40 centimeters long and 20 in diameter, at the thickest part of the center. So far, the largest crystals ever found or grown had been at least half that size. The crystal glistened in the lantern light with familiar bluish shimmers, which meant that it was almost completely discharged. Only occasional purple sparks ran along its edges, either reflections from the light of the two lanterns or, "Don't!" Chingri's cry cut through the eerie dead silence of the shelter, littered with the bones of its dead inhabitants. But it was too late. Meshel reached out with both hands and gingerly grasped the crystal. I don't know why the hell they put it on this altar, he said, but I can't see any power leads on the plus or minus side. It's just standing there in this little socket, not permanently attached. Now I'll... He didn't finish. Absolute darkness spilled out of the crystal, instantly drowning the light of the lanterns and the consciousness of both adventurers. Holy shit! What was that? They ran down the corridors of the shelter, no longer aware of what was beneath their feet, stumbling over the Tofane remains that littered the floor and knocking down flimsy barricades along the way. There were no more tides of darkness like the one in the central hall, but they had had enough of what they had already experienced. According to the clock, they'd both blacked out for just a few seconds, but it seemed to Meshel like an eternity, immersed in concentrated, unformed, primal terror. He had no clear memories, no emotions, except one. To get out of there as quickly as possible so as not to embody once again the incomprehensible thing that had taken hold of him and had been him for those few endless moments. We'll discuss it when we're at least a couple of dozen light years away from this place, Chingray said. And Michel envied the Lutranian. His conversational apparatus was not connected to his breathing sacs, and he could talk, even at full speed. Michel was desperately gulping for air, but he suspected that it was not only from running, but also from the fear he had experienced. As they jumped into the ship, abandoning all the equipment set up at the shelter's entrance, Chingri began the pre-launch procedure and tore the ship away before the cargo hatch ramp could slam shut. They barely exchanged a word until the ship entered the hypernode at the system's edge, and only then did Chingri speak. Now I understand what confused me about how the Tofane bodies were arranged in the shelter, he said. We got it all wrong. Michel grinned nervously. Are you saying they didn't kill each other, but died peacefully of old age? Somehow that doesn't fit with what we saw. No, they did fight. But their soldiers weren't defending the sanctuary from invaders. They were trying to stop those trying to break out of the shelter. The layout of the barricades, the soldiers' bodies, and their opponents. Everything suggests that the attack was coming from inside to outside, from the altar to the exit. Michel looked at him, stunned. But what was the point of that? It would have made more sense to let them out and let them go wherever they wanted. Easier to survive. The Lutranian was silent for a moment. I think it was quite different. I think the soldiers entered the shelter and locked the door behind them, and did everything they could to ensure no one got out of the shelter, including themselves. But it didn't work. What do you mean? The faceted eyes expressed nothing, but Meshel was ready to swear that the Lutrinian was up to something. We still don't know two crucial things, Chingray said. Until now, they seemed unrelated. But after what happened, first, we don't know why Tofane started this all-galactic Armageddon, and secondly, we don't know exactly how the quantumite works. Scientists say, Michel started to say, but Chingray stopped him. Scientists say that they have learned to treat ordinary carbon crystals in such a way that their subatomic structure changes, and they become quantumite. They expose them to black holes in orbits where no living thing can survive. That's why quantumite is so expensive. But the truth is, we still don't fully understand what black holes are. We are like monkeys with a grenade. No, with a thermonuclear bomb. We jump on it, draw funny pictures on its side, and press different buttons because something inside it hums and squeaks funny. It sounds really creepy when you think of it that way, said Meshel. Well, then think a bit harder. There is a theory that black holes are passageways to another universe. Which one? What is it? What could be leaking out of it? We use them to alter ordinary matter into something that denies the physical laws of our universe. Quantumite. It was once used by the Tofane, and quantumite affected them, just like it probably affected us. Wait, what are you saying? Meshel asked, feeling the cold creeping up his spine. That something came out of the other universe and caused the Tofane to commit mass suicide. Do you remember the darkness? Chingray answered the question with a question. Meshel fell silent. We can't go back, Chingray said. We don't know what the altar has done to us. Meshel looked at his partner in incomprehension, and then suddenly he understood. What have you done, you bloody grasshopper? He yelled and rushed to the control panel. It's too late, Chingray said. The chain reaction in the reactor core had already crossed the critical threshold. He pressed a key, and a countdown timer appeared on the large display. Meshel watched, mesmerized, as the numbers changed, counting down the last moments of his life. 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. He closed his eyes, but nothing happened. He was still alive. Chingray slowly turned away from the screen and looked at Meshel. Quantumite, they said almost simultaneously, jumping up from their seats. They ran into the technical bay that housed the quantumite crystal energy receiver. Only a few centimeters long, the small crystal lay in a special slot in the receiver, glowing purple. All the reactor's readings were normal, as if it hadn't just been on the verge of annihilation. The quantumite had absorbed all of its energy. But that's impossible. Meshel looked at Chingray. Quantumite has a capacity limit after all. We don't know what happened when that crystal in the shelter went off, the Lutrinian said slowly. Maybe it linked all the crystals to their home, to black holes, with channels to another universe, and our crystal transferred energy there. Why? Chingray looked at the crystal again, its glow growing stronger by the second. I guess we'll find out soon enough, he said. The darkness that came was almost predictable. When the small ship with 2 crew members on board came out of the hypernode on the solar system's outskirts, it had to immediately begin maneuvering vigorously to avoid colliding with the wreckage of the blown-up customs station. The ship had several days to go to Earth, but there was little point in rushing there, as its melted surface would remain radioactive for hundreds of thousands of years. But that could not upset those on board, for they had nothing to do with Meshel and Chingray anymore. Nevertheless, they still had much to do. They had to scour all the neighboring systems and make sure that the second cycle was completed as efficiently as the first, and only then would they return home.